So, a very good namaste to all, to my students. So, we'll be discussing a very important competency, which is PY 10.8. Describe and discuss behavioral and EEG characteristics during sleep and mechanism responsible for its production. So, now we'll be discussing a still higher chapters in the central nervous system. We're discussing EEG and characteristics during sleep and mechanism responsible for its production. So this topic cannot be, this competency cannot be covered in a single session. So it will be completed in multiple sessions. So in this session, I'll be taking up the EEG, different types of EEG and different EEG abnormalities. Epilepsy I'll be discussing along with this, and then we'll be continuing in the next. So what are the specific learning objectives of this competency? So we might not be discussing the whole of this competency today, but in this you should be able to know that what are the specific learning objectives you should be able to learn or understand after the complete of these sessions. So at the end of the session, the end of the rather sessions, the phase 1 MBBS students, we are talking of phase 1 MBBS students, should be able to discuss the procedure of electroencephalography. So how the electroencephalography is performed? What is the procedure behind it? Secondly, he or she should be able to enumerate the different electroencephalogram waves correctly. So in short, electroencephalogram is known as EEG. So he should be, or you should be able to name the different waves or brain waves which you record during EEG. Then after the different names, you should be able to give what is the or explain that what is the physiological basis of EEG and its different waves clearly. So what is the basis of alpha wave, beta wave, delta wave, theta wave correctly, and you should be able to clearly understand what is the, why does these waves occur, why do you get these waves in the record. So am I clear? uh, Next learning specific learning objective is that you should be able to enumerate the types of sleep in humans correctly. There are different types of sleep, non-REM sleep, REM sleep. We'll be discussing those types of sleep. So we should be able to, you should be able to name what are the different types of sleep in humans accurately. Then next is you should be able to make the sense of different theories of generation of sleep in humans. Why does the sleep occur? So different theories have been put forth, and you should make exactly what is the uh, background behind these theories and why they are important, and what is the most probable theory. Then next is you should be able to reproduce the physiological changes occurring in humans during sleep appropriately. That is, when you sleep, what exactly occurs, what are the physiological changes occurring in your body during different types of sleep. You should be able to know. Then next is you should be able to differentiate between types of sleep correctly. First you should be able to name the types of sleep, then theories which regarding the generation of sleep, then what are the different physiological changes, and then you should be able to differentiate between different types of sleep like REM sleep and non-REM sleep, and then you should be able to explain the behavioral changes occurring during sleep in humans. Why? What are the background of these behavioral changes which occur during sleep? So you should be clear about this. Then another learning objective is that you should be able to correlate the EEG changes which are recording during sleep in humans with its different stages correctly. That is, when a person sleeps, what are the different type of EEGs recorded in different types of sleep. Then you should be able to discuss the uses of EEG. Why do we need to do EEG and where do we need to do the EEG? What is exactly usefulness of performing recording the EEG? Then describe the abnormal EEG waveforms correctly. That you should be able to describe what are different abnormal EEG waveforms and why do they occur. Then very important topic is that enumerate different types of seizures or epilepsy. You should be able to know that what are different types of epilepsies, or nowadays they are commonly called as seizures. What are their names? And then after you knowing the name, you should be able to explain the different types of epilepsies. First you know the name, then their explanation, and finally you should be able to give an outline the treatment of seizures. We'll not be going in much of the detail of the treatment of seizures, but just an outline of treatment of seizures, what is important at your stage. In your future classes, you will be studying in your pharmacology classes and medicine classes, you'll be studying more about the treatment of seizures, but we'll be discussing just an outline of the treatment of seizures. Now, important about this is that in this session of lecture, we'll be concentrating on EEG mainly, and then uh, different physiological basis of EEG, different waves of EEG, different types of EEG, how do we record EEG, and then what is the use of EEG, what are the different wave abnormal EEGs, and what are different EEG patterns in different types of sleep, and then the different types of epilepsies with their explanation and the treatment. About the sleep part, another topic is that the sleep in detail will be discussed in the subsequent lecture. So now let's start the topic electroencephalogram or EEG. In short, it is EEG. So what is it? As we know by electrocardiogram that gram is the record and graph is not the record. So same here, electroencephalogram is the record of spontaneous electrical activities of cerebral cortex recorded from the surface of the scalp, and these undulations in the recorded electrical potentials, they are recorded in the waveform, so they are called as brain waves. I again repeat, what is the electroencephalogram or EEG? This is a record of spontaneous electrical activities of cerebral cortex which is recorded from the surface of the scalp of a person. And what electrical activities you record, they are recorded in the form of undulations. So undulations in the recorded electrical potentials, they are in the waveform. So these undulations or variations in the recorded electrical potentials are in the waveforms, and these waves are called as brain waves. Now, who was the person who first of all described these waves or introduced the term EEG or electroencephalogram? So the person responsible for this was a German psychiatrist named Hans Berger, who in 1929 introduced the term EEG, and this is the reason sometimes the EEG rhythms are also called as Berger rhythms. So I again repeat, EEG rhythms as were discovered by a German psychiatrist Hans Berger, so sometimes they are called as the Berger. Now, as in ECG, same is the nomenclature here is same. That is, here like in electrocardiography is the procedure there. Again here the electroencephalography is the procedure of recording the EEG or electroencephalogram, and electroencephalograph is the instrument. Like we had electrocardiograph, same is here. The electroencephalogram is the graph is the instrument. Sometimes the electrodes can be directly placed on the exposed brain or pyometer. So this is known as electrocorticogram. Again repeat, sometimes the electrodes are directly placed on the exposed brain. That is sometimes due to certain reasons you need to expose the brain, open up the skull. So you can directly place electrodes on the exposed part of the brain on the pyometer, and the record which you get is called as electrocorticogram. And how do we do this electroencephalography? So technique of as I clearly said, that electroencephalography is the technique of recording EEG. So EEG can be performed by two methods. We can use bipolar method or we can use unipolar method. As the bipolar record clearly states that here bipolar means that you have two electrodes and you record the fluctuations in potential between two cortical electrodes which are placed on the 2 points on the scalp. Now, while in the unipolar record, a unipolar method, it shows the potential differences between a cortical electrode and a theoretically indifferent electrode which can be placed on some parts of the body away from the cortex or Many electrodes can be placed on the skull, or all can be connected to the galvanometer, while one is connected separately, being the exploring electrode, like we used to do in the case of ECG. So one electrode becomes the exploring electrode, and you may connect the other point to multiple electrodes, but then you pass through a galvanometer, and you record the potential difference between a cortical electrode and theoretically indifferent electrode, like you do in the case of the ECG. As I was mentioning earlier, that in the bipolar method, you record, this is the record of potential variation between two active cortical scalp electrodes. That is, you place both the electrodes on the scalp and you record the potential variation or difference between the two electrodes, as we did in the case of ECG. In the case of unipolar method, the name itself says that only one electrode will be important here. So the record of potential difference between an active cortical scalp electrode and a theoretically indifferent electrode, which can be placed on some distant parts, like for example on earlobe or on the nose or chin, etc. And then we connect it, then can all be connected to one galvanometer, and then you can record the difference between the two. Now the exploring electrodes basically records the potential. Now the electrodes are connected to a cathode ray oscilloscope via an amplifier, like we used to do in the case of the ECG. The modern ECG machines, they have about 8 to 16 channels simultaneously recording electrical activities from areas of many scalp electrodes. You see, these are the electrodes, and these are the small cup-like structures, or small metal discs. These are the electrodes, and these are connected by wires, and they have a suction, and they are basically the electrodes here. They are multicolored electrodes. So what are electrodes? These are small metal discs about 0.5 centimeter, either made up of steel or tin or gold or silver, coated with silver chloride coating. They are very small. You'll be seeing, we'll be seeing this in the, we'll be showing you the same electrodes in the clinical physiology labs when you come back from your going back to the college. And now the different techniques are used. What about the location part? Now where do we keep these electrodes? Now the location, different techniques are used to determine the electrodes attaching position. There are different techniques. Some people use some techniques, some use some technique, but we'll be focusing on the commonest technique which is being used. So the most common method or the commonest technique is international 10-20 system, or as 10-20 system, as electrodes are spaced at either 10 or 20% of the total distance between a given pair of skull landmarks. We'll be explaining what is it. So why this is known as 10-20 system? Why do we use the international 10-20 system? Here the electrodes are spaced either at 10% or 20% of the total distance between a given pair of skull landmarks. Now, as I mentioned earlier, that why do we call it as 10-20 system is because the electrodes are spaced either at 10% or 20% of the total distance between a given pair of skull landmarks. Now, what are those landmarks? From where do we measure? Measurement is done from 4 standard points on the head. You should be very clear about these 4 points. First is the nasion, that is just above the in the center of the eyes, in the end of the beginning of the nasal bridge. This is the nasion. This is the nasion, and then the occipital, lower occipital region. This is the back of the head. This is the inion, and then the pre-auricular points on the right side. This is the left on the right side and the left side. So we have 4 points, 4 standard reference points in the 10-20 system. First is the nasion, then posteriorly the inion, and on both sides the right and left pre-auricular points. Now if you see that how do we do it, just for your interest, I'll not going much of the detail, but just to give your interest, we take a measuring tape, we clear the point, and then we measure this anterior-posterior area, distance between the nasion and the inion. Then we space the electrodes at 10 position from the nasion, 10%. Then the next is placed at the 20%, the head, and then again 20%, 20%, 20%, and 10%. So basically we measure the whole area between the nasion and inion and divide proportionately, keep the electrodes at the position from the 10%, 20%, 20%, 20%, 20%, and so these are divided respectively on the, then the transverse line of the head is again divided from, then the distance between the two preauricular points is measured, and again this is divided into 10%, 20%, 20%, 20%, and 10%. Then the whole area of the scalp is divided into various points on the basis of the line passing through the above described points, and these points have been given the specific names and numbers. Now, as I told you, after spacing or after measuring the area between the nasion and inion and the preauricular points, we divide proportionately the area in 10%, 20%, 20%, 20%, 10%. Then we place the electrodes at these points. Location of each electrode is labeled with a letter and a number. See, you can see from here. I'll not go in much of the detail exactly how do you do the procedure. I'll just give you what is important for you. So let us see, this is the nasion, this is the point is nasion, and this is the inion. Okay, this is the left preauricular point, this is the right preauricular point. Z specifies the central point, electrodes placed in the midline. Okay, then the letter specifies the area of the brain, like F for the frontal lobe, T for temporal lobe, and Z refers to the electrode placed in the midline. See, frontal lobe, P for the parietal lobe, C for the central part, and then T for the temporal lobe, O for the occipital lobe. Now the right side of the head is denoted by the even numbers. You can see here F4, F8, T4, C4, T6. These are all the even numbers and they denote the right side of the head. While the left side of the head is denoted by odd numbers. You can see 3, T5, P3. So what is, we place here and see, this is frontoparietal, this is frontal, central, parietal, then occipital, temporal, then see frontoparietal, then we can name it accordingly, we name them, and this is already given on these electrodes, the number, and then we place those electrodes. We properly so now we'll talk of EEG recording modes. Now first of all, how we do it, we do with the help of montages. Montage is what? It is a method of combining the electrode positions, that is their placement. Now see, if you see that this patient, his EEG is being recorded, he is wearing a typical cap, EEG cap is there. In this already electrodes are fitted over here and we just apply the cap and record. So what happens, what we want to record, I told you already that there are different positions. We want to record from here or here or here. So we place the electrodes like this, and then already there are certain calculations, predetermined positions of the electrode is there, which is known as montages. So we use different montages and already we know the position of these montages, and then we can easily record the EEG. Then the patient is asked to, what we do is, the advice for the patient is that you just relax. He's asked to relax in a reclining chair, or you make him very much comfortable. You tell him to lie in the recommend position or lying down position. You should make the patient comfortable. He should be relaxed. Then only you can get the proper record. Then electrodes are placed on the scalp as specified. We have already given the positions. So what we do is, with the help of the paper or the sandpaper, we completely clean the area or this portion of the part of the brain or scalp, different parts, and then we apply the jelly with a special jelly. There are cup like the jelly is filled within this cup of the electrodes, and or we can use a cap containing electrodes can be used, and then slowly we can record the EEG, and then the EEG is recorded casually. Now we have positioned the electrode. Now we switch on the electroencephalograph, and then the electrodes pick up and record the brain electrical activity. So once they record the brain activity or pick up the brain activity, this electroencephalogram collects the EEG signals. These signals are then amplified in the machine itself and then digitized. Nowadays we have a digitized data as compared to the earlier times. Earlier times it was rather difficult to interpret and it was a cumbersome process. Now this data is sent to a computer for storage, and final data is then evaluated. You can immediately evaluate the data. We can store the data and evaluate at a later time. Then EEG is monitored with a bipolar montage, as I told you, or a referential one. So either you use a bipolar montage or use a referential one. What do you mean by bipolar montage? In this, 2 electrodes per one channel are used, and with a reference electrode for each channel. So again repeat, in the bipolar, 2 electrodes per one channel are used with a reference electrode for each channel. And another is the referential montage, a common reference electrode for all the channels. As you were saying, the unipolar, bipolar, this is in reference to that. So referential montage is a common reference electrode for all the channels. In the bipolar, we can select any one with the pre-specified positions. Before recording the EEG, we need to consider certain factors or conditions which can affect your record of EEG. That is, your record of EEG can be affected in a normal or abnormal way. So one of the important factor is hypoglycemia. Hypoglycemia gives different EEG rhythms, and then body-eye movements during rest test can also affect the EEG. Lights, especially bright lights or flashing ones, can also alter the record of EEG. Sometimes certain medications, for example, the patient is on sedatives, it can again change the pattern of recorded EEG. Then the drinks containing caffeine like coffee, tea, cola, etc., if given to the subject just prior to the EEG, it can hamper the recording of EEG. And even the oily hair at presence of hairspray can affect. So hairspray can affect the EEG recording. So what you need to do? Now, for these reasons, you should also keep these all things in mind before going for EEG, and certain other precautions should be taken. You ask the person or the patient to wash the hair with no conditioner. You should wash the hair and he should not apply any hairspray or conditioner. He or she should avoid consuming foods, drinks containing caffeine for at least 8 to 12 hours prior to the test. So what you get in the normal EEG, the normal EEG is seen as oscillations in the electrical potential of brain, and these are recorded as brain waves, which I earlier told you that in a normal EEG you record the what you get. How is the record type? What type of record you get? You get the record in the form of oscillations or waves, which are called as brain waves. So what will be the frequency which you are recording of the EEG waves? Frequency of the EEG waves can vary from as little as 1 cycle to as high as 50 cycles per second. Okay. Then the amplitude or the voltage can also vary from as minimal as 20 microvolt to 200 microvolt. So this voltage is still lesser as compared to the EEG voltage. So what we get is more amplified version. Then another important factor, why these and the waves are different. When you keep your scalp electrodes at different positions of the scalp, you get different types of the waves. So brain waves recorded from different scalp location, they vary, they differ from each other. Another very important factor which affects the type of the wave or the character of the wave is the cerebral activity. Cerebral activity is that the character of the wave can vary between the states of wakefulness and sleep to coma. So depending upon your activity, either you are awake, you are asleep, or you are under coma, and the person lands up in coma. So you would record different types of waves. Let us take an example. In an awake, alert, fully alert individual, what will happen? He has sensory inputs are maximum. So the waves which you record in such a person will be of high frequency, low voltage or low amplitude, and they will be totally desynchronized. While in a case of a person who is minimally alert or least alert or as in deep sleep, or the sensory inputs are minimal, here the waves are of low frequency. Opposite to this, voltage is high, that is amplitude is high, and they're completely synchronized waves you record because there is no sensory input going on. So while if you record a straight line, you record no wave, it means either there is brain death, or the instrument is defective, or the recording is defective, or there is some artifact. So I was repeating again and again different types of EEG waves or the brain waves. So what are different types of EEG waves or the brain waves? There are mainly four waves or rhythm: alpha wave or rhythm, or beta wave or rhythm, or theta waves or rhythm, or delta waves or rhythm. See, this is the alpha wave, generally seen awake with mental awake when resting. See, these are the alpha waves. The frequency is about 8 to 13 hertz, and the voltage is also, frequency is more but the voltage is less, so comparatively more than the beta. In the case of beta waves, the frequency is higher, 14 to 30 hertz, and the voltage is less. And in the case of theta waves, generally seen during sleep, here the frequency is decreased, 4 to 7 hertz, and the amplitude is high. And in the deep sleep, you get a delta type of waves which have the low frequency, about less than 3.5 hertz, but the amplitude is very high. So let us discuss these waves one by one. Now, the first brain wave is the alpha waves or rhythm. So if you record EEG from the normal adults, this type of wave will be seen in almost all normal adults. So when it is seen, so I told you the cerebral activity is also very important. So when a person is awake in a quite resting, relaxed state and his eyes are closed, can you imagine a situation? Just relax, be quiet, feel rested, and close your eyes. Imagine that position, and then let us record your EEG, and what EEG record we get while we place the electrodes at the required position is the alpha waves. So here there is least sensory stimulation. The person is awake. He is not asleep but resting. The eyes are closed. I again repeat, imagine yourself, you are awake, you are rested, you are peaceful with no sensory activity, and your eyes are closed. The record which you get is the alpha rhythm. Okay. The frequency can vary from 8 to 13 cycles per second. The amplitude is between 50 to 100 microvolt. Frequency is 8 to 13 cycles per second, and amplitude is about 50 to 100 microvolt. And from where do we record these alpha waves? If you remember, I told you the different scalp location, different types of waves. So which are the scalp position from where you record the alpha waves? They are the most intensely recorded from occipital region. This should be clear. You place the electrode at the occipital region, you record the best character of alpha waves. Also, they can be recorded from your parietal, temporal, and sometimes even from the frontal region. Again repeat, the alpha. Alpha is the, you can remember this way, alpha is the first letter and occipital is the back. So they are at the reverse position. And from the back of the head, that is the occipital, you record the alpha wave, which are the frequency of 8 to 13 cycles per second, high amplitude about 50 to 100 microvolt, and they can also be recorded from the parietal, temporal, and sometimes the frontal regions of the brain. Now, these alpha waves, they disappear during sleep. I told you they are recorded when you are close your eyes but you are not asleep, you are awake, you are aware of your surrounding. These are attenuated or decreased by eye opening. See, eyes are closed. These are eye opening, alerting stimuli or attention. So there is a term called as alpha block or desynchronization. What is it? Suppose in a relaxed person with eyes closed, you are getting a low frequency, high amplitude alpha rhythm. Then suddenly there is breakup of this alpha rhythm. So when will it occur? When will it occur? There is suddenly loss of alpha rhythm. Suddenly the person opens his or her eyes. There is any sensory stimulation or you give him any mental activity like solving an arithmetic problem, so that the alpha rhythm will be replaced by the asynchronous uh, high frequency low amplitude beta rhythm on in EEG. See, this is the eyes closed is alpha rhythm. Then suddenly the eyes are opened. This is converted to a this high frequency, low voltage, low amplitude beta rhythm. So this is known as, this phenomena is called as alpha block or desynchronization, because it represents the breaking up of the synchronized neural activity responsible to produce the regular waves. And because this alpha block is produced by sensory stimulation and is correlated with the arousal or alert state, it is also sometimes called the arousal or alerting response. I again repeat, in a person who you are recording, who is awake, eyes closed, and you are recording a low frequency high voltage alpha rhythm, suddenly the rhythm changes into a desynchronized this high frequency low voltage rhythm or beta rhythm. And uh, due to the reasons are, you generally tell the person to open his eyes, you give him any sensory stimulation, you give him a mental task to solve certain mathematical problems. You can see the difference over here. So here the phenomena is called as alpha block or desynchronization. In this is also called as alerting response or reaction, because this is produced by sensory stimulation and is correlated with the arousal and alert state, because suddenly the person is aroused or alert. So this is also known as the alerting response or the arousal. Now, there are certain conditions where there is changes in the alteration of the alpha rhythm, either the frequency is increased or frequency is decreased. So what are those conditions? So like when the blood glucose levels are increased, your alpha rhythm frequency is going to increase. But when it is there is hypoglycemia, the frequency decreases. So the opposite happens. In hyperglycemia, the frequency increases. In hypo, it decreases. Same is case in the case of temperature. When there is hyperthermia, the frequency is increased. Hyper, more, frequency more. Hypo, less, again the frequency will be decreased. Here, but in the case of third factor is the, when there is low partial pressure of carbon dioxide, arterial carbon dioxide, or when you hyperventilate, there is increased frequency of alpha rhythm. And when there is here, when there is high partial pressure of arterial carbon dioxide, then the frequency is rather decreased. Then there is, whenever there is increased in the glucocorticoids, either adrenal or from outside, it leads to increased frequency. Again, here is it increased. While in the case of decreased adrenal glucocorticoids, or there is decreased glucocorticoids, the frequency is decreased. In the alert state, the frequency is increased, while during sleep, during anesthesia and analgesia, the frequency is decreased. Now, the blood pressure when decreases or there is hypertension, the frequency decreases. But and other conditions which decrease the frequency are old age. In the old age, what happens? Because the vessels, they lose their elasticity, so there is decreased cerebral perfusion. This leads to decreased cerebral metabolism and thus decreases the frequency of alpha rhythm. Then any infection of the brain, encephalitis due to any cause like metabolic, hyponatremia, toxic factors, vitamin B12 deficiency, etc. These can all lead to decreased frequency of the alpha. Now the second types of wave recorded is the beta wave or rhythm, and this is the frequency of the waves here is more as compared to the alpha rhythm, whereas the frequency is about 18 to 30 cycles per second with an average of 14 cycles per second. The amplitude is less if you compare with that of the alpha waves, less than 50 microvolt. It can be about 5 to generally lower than the alpha waves. It can range from 5 to 10 microvolt. See, this is the beta waves. You see, the frequency is more if you compare with the alpha waves, but the amplitude is less, and they are mainly recorded from the frontal and the parietal regions. And they are commonly recorded under the following conditions. What are those following conditions? They are recorded in the infants. They are recorded in the infants. Infants mainly have fast beta-like activity in EEG, and occipital rhythm is their slow. While when you are aroused during arousal or when you are tense, there is CNS activation, and when the person is given barbiturates, they record the beta rhythm. I again repeat, commonly recorded from frontal and the parietal region. Alpha mainly from the occipital region. This is from frontal as well as parietal region. Commonly recorded under the infants usually have the beta type of fast activity. When a person is aroused awake, you have the beta rhythm, or during any mental tension or CNS activation, again you record the beta rhythm. And then if you give drugs like barbiturates, these drugs, they cause the beta rhythm. Now the third type of record is theta waves or rhythm. Here the frequency is less. It's not high as we see in the case of the beta rhythm. Frequency is less, about 4 to 7 cycles per second, but the voltage is very high. Voltage is higher than even the alpha waves. It's about between 20 to 200 microvolts. You see, the voltage is very high, and it is mainly recorded from parietal and temporal regions. This alpha wave was mainly recorded from the occipital region. Beta waves were mainly recorded from the frontal and parietal regions. These are mainly recorded from the parietal and temporal regions. So in whom you see the theta waves? Theta wave is generally seen in young children. They are generally seen in young children. It do not occur in a normal adult waking individuals except in newborn infants. And during emotional stress in adults, especially during disappointment and frustration, you can record the theta waves. I again repeat, these are mainly recorded in young children. In a normal awake individual, these are not recorded except in the newborn infants, and when the person, an adult, is stressed, especially during disappointment and frustration, you can record. These theta waves, they persist in some 10 to 15% of normal adults. You can record if you give record the theta waves in some normal individuals, then sometimes it may be normal, because in 10 to 15% of normal adults, they persist even in adult life. And important aspect is that as a child cries, their frequency decreases. They accentuate, these waves accentuate, and they are also seen in certain brain disorders. Then the normal rhythm in the hippocampus in experimental animal is what is the theta waves, and in the temporal region in older individuals you record this type of wave, and sometimes it in early sleep drowsy individuals. When a person is a drowsy or asleep in early sleep, you can record the theta waves. Again repeat, in 10 to 15% of normal adults, the theta waves, they persist, and also seen in certain brain disorders, and normal rhythm in the hippocampus when in an experimental animal, and also seen in the temporal region in the older individuals. As the person becomes old, you can record the theta waves from the temporal region, and sometimes in an early sleep or drowsy adult, you can record the theta waves. Now another important wave recorded is the this delta waves or rhythm. If you see these delta waves, they are generally seen during deep sleep. They are generally seen during sleep. Their frequency is less than 4 cycles per second, roughly about 3 to 5 cycles per second, less than 4 cycles per second. Amplitude is very high, 20 to 200 microvolt amplitude is there. Sometimes they are as low as 1 cycle per second, or every 2 to 3 seconds you record a wave. So these occurs in there is an intracortical dependence of these waves, and they occur in the cortex independent of the lower regions of the low regions of the brain. these waves, these delta waves, they can be seen in normal adults during deep sleep. When you are in deep sleep, you can we record your EEG. What type of waves will you get is these delta waves, and in normal infants, both during sleep as well as awake, you can record these waves. In serious brain diseases, for example, tumors, abscesses, epilepsy, etc., you can record the delta waves. What happens is that basically the neurons around the dead area or injured area, they show these waves, and the central portion is will not show any record. So we can mark out where the lesion is present. Then cortex of experimental animals with subcortical transection, we can also record the delta waves. Why these waves are recorded? Because they individuals, they have the intracortical dependence. So delta waves can occur strictly in the cortex independent of activity in low regions of the brain. So during sleep, what happens? Your lower brain and upper brain, they completely dissociate, and this is the reason you record these. Now, there can be certain variations in the EEG depending on multiple factors. One of the factors is age. So in infants, you record fast beta-like activity is seen. The occipital rhythm is slow. It's about zero point 0.5 to 2 cycles per second, but normally you record the fast beta-like activity. As the child grows during childhood, the rhythm, it speeds up, and gradually the adult alpha rhythm is taken over by the adolescent. The rhythm gets converted to alpha rhythm of adult. Now, when there is blood glucose levels are decreased, have we already discussed as far as alpha rhythm is concerned. So whenever there is hypoglycemia, there is decreased frequency of alpha rhythm, and there is hyperglycemia, there is increased frequency of alpha rhythm. And during hypoglycemia, the frequency of alpha rhythm, it decreases, and there is appearance of delta rhythm also starts appearing. So along with decreased frequency of alpha rhythm, you have appearance of delta rhythm. Then during hypothermia, you have decreased frequency of alpha rhythm, while during hyperthermia, there is increased frequency of alpha rhythm. Then glucocorticoids, low levels lead to decreased frequency of alpha rhythm, and high levels lead to increased frequency of alpha rhythm. Now, whenever there is hypoxia, mild hypoxia will lead to decreased frequency of alpha rhythm, because the neurons are being affected, the activity of the neurons will be affected. So what you get in EEG, there is decreased frequency of alpha rhythm. Then when there is severe hypoxia, the appearance of delta rhythm, it comes in picture. So you record the delta rhythm here. Then about the carbon dioxide, we discussed that when there is high arterial partial pressure of carbon dioxide, you get increased frequency of alpha rhythm, or when there is decreased arterial PCO2 or partial pressure of carbon dioxide, there is decreased frequency of alpha rhythm. Then activity of cerebral cortex, in during stupor or surgical anesthesia or sleep, you record the delta waves. You record which waves? You record the delta. So when there are psychomotor states or infants, what type of wave you will get? You will get the theta waves. In relaxed state, eyes closed, alert, you get alpha waves. In the periods of intense mental activity, you get the beta waves. So when there is deep relaxation and meditation or mental imaginary, or there is psychomotor state, you get the theta waves. Or when there is deep dreaming, there is stupor or surgical anesthesia or sleep, you get the delta waves. When you are relaxed, calm, lucid, not thinking, no sensory stimulation, there are alpha waves. When you are awake, normal, alert, you are intense mental activity, you have the beta waves. In the case of narcotics, the person is on narcotics, the alpha waves are replaced by the delta waves. They are replaced by these delta waves. And during wakefulness and sleep, in alert wakefulness, beta waves. In alert wakefulness, you get beta waves. In quiet wakefulness, you get the alpha waves. So what are different type of EEG you record during the different waves of sleep? We'll be discussing the different types of sleep in subsequent lecture, but there are basically two types of sleep: slow wave sleep and rapid eye movement sleep. Slow wave sleep is further divided into 4 stages. So stage wise we'll be discussing what are the different EEG records in different stages. So first is stage 1 of non-REM sleep. Here the subject starts becoming drowsy. First he's alert, he's awake, okay, and then he closes his eyes, he starts becoming drowsy. The beta rhythm changes to alpha rhythm, and during light sleep alpha rhythm is replaced by high frequency and low voltage EEG waves. See? So stage 1, he is drowsy, the beta rhythm gets converted to alpha rhythm, that is of the light sleep. Alpha rhythm starts being replaced by the high frequency and low voltage EEG waves. Then next, now during the second stage of non-REM sleep or slow wave sleep, the voltage of EEG waves starts increasing. You start seeing the voltage starts increasing, and there is appearance of the sleep spindles. These sleep spindles or K complexes, they start appearing. So what are these sleep spindles? They are bursts of alpha-like activity. See, sleep spindles, burst of alpha-like activity about 10 to 14 hertz, and the voltage is about 50 microvolt, and there is waxing and waning of voltage, waxing and waning of the voltage. See, waxing and waning of the voltage. And then these auditory stimuli during this phase uh, evoke the K complexes in the EEG. They also occur spontaneously during this stage. The K complexes consists of 1 to 2 high voltage waves with by a interrupt followed by a high 1 to 2 high voltage waves followed by brief 14 hertz activity. So sleep spindles are burst of alpha-like activity about 10 to 14 hertz, about 50 microvolt waxing and waning voltage, and also there is any auditory stimuli, the K complexes appear. They are 1 to 2 high voltage waves followed by a brief 14 hertz activity. So next, then third stage or non-REM sleep. Again repeat, see, the person is awake, low voltage, high frequency beta waves are there. Then suddenly the person starts becoming drowsy. The waves are replaced by alpha waves, and then the stage 1 sleep, the theta waves, they become prominent. Then they are replaced by this another type of wave, and then the stage 2, the sleep spindles, they start appearing along with the K complexes. Sleep spindles, they are waxing and waning waves, alpha rhythm. Then there is the K complexes, 1 to 2 waves followed by high frequency waves. Then in stage 3 and 4, if you see stage 3 and 4, there is progressive more delta waves. Frequency of EG waves decrease and the voltage increases. See, more and more the frequency has decreased but the voltage is decreased. And then in the stage 4, there is predominant delta waves with rhythmic slow waves, and there is marked synchronization. See, marked synchronization is there. So in stage 3 and 4, the progressively the delta waves are replacing the other waves. Now during the this REM sleep or the during REM sleep, what happens, or rapid eye movement sleep, what happens is that now we get irregular high frequency regular and low voltage waves. They appear like beta rhythm, and there is the waves typically appear like beta waves, which is normally suggestive of excess but desynchronized nervous activity as found in the awake state. And it is often difficult to tell the difference between this brainwave pattern and that you get an alert awake person. So in REM sleep, it is frequently called as the desynchronized or paradoxical sleep because there is lack of synchrony in the firing. See, totally like disarray is there, desynchronized. There is lack of synchrony in the firing of neurons despite there is significant brain activity. There is brain activity, but we try to arouse the person, he will not be able to arouse the person. The brain activity appears that his brain is very much active, but when you try to wake him up, you're not able to wake him up. So there is, the rhythm is desynchronized, but the person is in deep sleep. Okay. Now, coming to a very important aspect, you should know that what is the physiological basis of EEG? What is the origin of the reason behind these brain waves? Now, what you are recording is not basically the action potentials. You're not recording the action potential. You see earlier you have studied about the action potentials. You are recording the like you cannot record the discharge of a single neuron or a single nerve fiber in the brain from the surface of the head. But what you do is many thousands or even millions of neurons or fiber must fire synchronously. Only then will the potential from the individual neuron or fiber summate enough to be recorded all the way through the skull. Thus, the intensity of the brain waves from the scalp is determined mainly by the number of neurons and fibers that fire in synchrony with each other, not by the total level of electrical activity in the brain. For even very strong non-synchronous nerve signals will actually nullify each other and cause only very weak potentials. So what I want to say is that you are not recording action potentials. You cannot record from a single neuron. Multiple neurons, they have to fire together or summate enough to be recorded all the way to the scalp. You are recording from the scalp. So intensity of the brain waves depend upon that how much synchronous the activity is. If the activity is more synchronous, you will get a better record, and the electrical activity will increase. And if there is non-synchronous, what will happen? The activity will nullify each other and the record will not be very strong. So the potential changes which are recorded in EEG are due to what it is due to? It is due to current flow in the fluctuating dipoles formed by cortical cell bodies and dendrites, especially in the most superficial layers. So the brain wave electrical potentials are generated mainly from the cortical layers 1 and 2, especially from the large, there is a large matrix of dendrites which are present, extend into these layers, surface areas from the neuronal cell which are located deeper in the cortex. Okay. So what you are recording in the EEG, you are recording the potential changes in the EEG are due to current flow which are formed by the fluctuating dipoles between the cortical cell bodies and the dendrites in the most superficial layers. Now the majority of electrical activity is summated synaptic potentials generated by group of pyramidal cells. The pyramidal cells are placed in the deeper layers. So the majority of electrical activity is dependent upon because of the summated synaptic potentials generated by the group of pyramidal cells which are deeply placed. And these pyramidal cells are placed in parallel to each other. They are placed in parallel to each other in the deep. Now this is rather very much confusing that what you are recording. You are recording from the surface. You are suppose that is this is the surface. This is the surface here, and this is the cell bodies. These are neuronal cell bodies of the pyramidal cell in the deeper layer, and these are dendrites which arborize in the superficial layers. And then what happens is that the pyramidal cells, they lie parallel to each other, and the dendrites are perpendicular to the surface. So these dendrites, they are sites of depolarizing and hyperpolarizing graded potentials in the layer 1 and 2. So we'll be discussing in detail. You just try to understand that these dendrite sites are sites of alternating depolarizing and hyperpolarizing graded potentials in layer 1 and 2. Graded potentials. These are not action potentials. These are graded potentials, electrotonic potentials. So cell dendrites relationship is of constantly shifting dipole. Dipole is the in a single in a dipole you have studied in the physics. In a single part, one part becomes positive and then negative. So that's shifting dipole. Earlier it was the part which was positive, it becomes negative, and the part which was negative becomes positive. So these cell dendrites, they shift their polarity and they become a constantly shifting dipole, and the dendrites, they act as current sink and electrical dipole is created. So how don't get confused, please. Let me explain how this happens. Let us discuss. So please don't look at my diagram. I'm not very good at drawing and I'm not technically strong also. I'm just wanted to explain you how and what is the physiological basis of EEG. So let us imagine this is a scalp. From here you are placed the electrodes and you're recording the electrode, and these are the cells, the pyramidal cells in the deeper layers, and the superficial layer there is the dendrites over there. So what is happening here, that this dendrite, as I told you, it becomes a shifting dipole. It becomes a shifting dipole. So the potentials which are generated in the tissue fluid surrounding these dendrites can be either positive or negative. So it can be positive or negative. So what you are doing is you are recording from here. You are recording these any potential changes from layer 1 and 2, and the dendrites are present over here. Those cells located in the deeper area in the cortex, they influence these cells. So when the neuronal cell bodies in the deeper layers, they discharge, like, and they, what will they discharge? Like they discharge and stimulate the cells in the superficial layer. What will happen? That this the inside becomes the positive and outside becomes negative. So negative charges will leak out of the cell body and cause negativity in the deeper cortical fluids. At the same time, this loss of negative charge leaves the interior of the neuron. This loss of negative charge will leave the interior of the neuronal cell membrane positive. It will become positive. The neuronal, am I clear that there is loss of the negative charge and the inside becomes the positive. This positivity is conducted electrotonically through the dendrites to the surface layers of the brain and transmitted by capacitive effect across the dendritic membrane to the fluid surrounding these dendrites. And what will happen? Here it will become it is negative, and here it is the outside is positive. What will happen? That the stimulation of neurons in the deeper layers in the cerebral cortex usually causes initial positivity on the surface of the brain. So here it is positive, here it is negative. So outside fluid is positive, and what is happening there? Then this electrons, they start flowing from the positive end to the negative area. Here the fluid is positive, so they start flowing from the positive to the negative. So the dendrite becomes the source and this becomes the sink. So here the dipole has, here it is positive and here it is negative, and you record the activity, you record the positive activity. So when the deeper cortical neurons, they are firing the positive, you record a positive wave. On the other hand, other cortical synapses which lie not on the deeper cortex but instead on the surface dendrites themselves, especially in the cortical layer 1 and 2, when these synapses are excited or depolarization occur in the dendrites itself. So what will happen now? In the now here, suppose depolarization occur here, these neurons, they arborize here, the positive charge will now leak out from here, and this inside will become positive, this will become negative. So now here what will happen is that the electrons, they start flowing from here to the positive end to the negative end. Here the shifting dipole occurs, here the this dendrite becomes the sink and this part becomes the source. So now you will record the you will record the from the negative, you will record negativity in the scalp. You will record what? You will record the negativity in the scalp. Am I clear? When the deeper layers, they stimulate, you record the positivity, and when the these neurons in the superficial layers, they stimulate the dendrites, you record the negative activity. Now I think I made myself clear. If you have any doubt, you can again contact me. So the intensity of brain waves depends upon the number of neurons and fibers which fire in synchrony with each other. That is, if neurons, they are synchronous, so you will record a positive wave. Otherwise, if they are not synchronous, the amount or the wave recording will be decreased. They will try to negate each other. So the fluctuations in electrical activity, it depends upon the intact non-specific thalamocortical projections. So thalamus basically discharges, thalamic discharges, they synchronize these activity. Now the alpha rhythm, alpha rhythm depends upon the fluctuation or the current flow between the dendrites and the cell body of the neurons as a result of impulse reaching the dendrites from the non-specific thalamocortical projections. So this is the reason these impulses, they produce alternate depolarization and hyperpolarization in layers 1 and 2, because what you are getting, the upper superficial layers, they are receiving continuously, the thalamus is discharging and you are receiving the non-specific thalamocortical projections. These non-specific thalamocortical projections, they end in layer 1 and 2, and these impulses produce alternate depolarization and hyperpolarization in layers 1 and 2. Because of this, Also the some changes occur, so there is alternate fluctuation of membrane potential between the dendrites and cell body of the neurons, and this is the reason that on undercutting alpha, if you cut the thalamocortical projections, the alpha rhythm completely disappears. The alpha rhythm disappears. Now, the cell bodies also show alternate fluctuation of membrane potential between dendritic process and cell body. This is now you are clear about it. Okay, the current flows between the two and which is recorded as EEG. The current flows between the 2 points, dendritic process in the cell body, and you record as EEG. Now, the sum of the dendritic activity, if positive, relative to the cell is hyperpolarized and less excitable. But when it is negative, the cell is depolarized and the hyperexcitable. Thus, the EEG which you record is due to graded potentials which are summated either postsynaptic excitatory postsynaptic potentials or inhibitory postsynaptic potentials in the brain neurons. So again repeat, the sum of the dendritic activity, if it is positive relative to the cell is hyperpolarized and less excitable, and if it is negative, the cell is depolarized and hyperexcitable. And the EEG you record is because of the graded potentials which are basically summated EPSPs or IPSP from the brain neurons. Now the synchronizing mechanisms of for these EEG, this depends upon the synchronizing activity of adjacent neurons. It depends upon two things: synchronizing activity of adjacent neurons as well as rhythmic discharge from the thalamus. The synchronizing activity of adjacent neurons occurs because the neurons are connected by each other by inhibitory pathways and become hyperexcitable after the inhibition. So their synaptic activity becomes synchronized. So what happens is that they are connected by inhibitory pathways and they become hyperexcitable. When initially they are inhibited, and when the inhibition is removed, they become hyperexcitable and their synaptic activity becomes synchronized. Moreover, they are present in a parallel. The effect of parallel neural processes in a volume conductor is also gives the is the reason for the synchronizing activity. Then the rhythmic discharge from the thalamus. Now the thalamus continuously non-specific thalamic nuclei, they are at stimulation at low frequency of about 8 cycles per second. They show similar activity will be recorded from the ipsilateral cerebral cortex, which is in the form of the alpha rhythm. What I mean to say is that stimulation of certain thalamic nuclei, especially the non-thalamic nuclei, at a frequency of 8 cycles per second produces an EEG with similar frequency in greater part of the ipsilateral cerebral cortex. That is, you stimulate these thalamic nuclei, non-specific thalamic nuclei, with a frequency of 8 cycles per second. What you record in the ipsilateral cerebral cortex is the alpha rhythm, and the amplitude of the waves also waxes and wanes, that is, alpha rhythms are produced. So whenever there are large lesions are produced in the thalamus, there is disturbances in the synchronized activity of the alpha rhythm. And when more and more frequencies increase, there is more and more recruitment of the fibers is there. So if we, as I told you earlier, that if we cut the fibers, these thalamocortical projections, they are cut, we get a desynchronized activity. Now the delta waves are dependent upon the intracortical fibers. The circuits present in the cortical neurons, that is the intracortical fibers. The synchronizing mechanism can occur in the cortical neurons themselves. They don't require any role of the lower system is the lower brain system, so they are independent of each other. Also, because we have seen the delta wave occur in deep sleep, this suggests that cortex might be released from the activating influence of the lower centers. Now there are certain desynchronizing mechanisms, that is the replacement of rhythmic EEG pattern by irregular low voltage activity or arousal can occur in different ways. One is, we already talked of alpha block. So stimulation of reticular activating system by high frequency stimulation. So initially what will happen? The thalamic fibers, they have they generate their own rhythm at the low frequency. You record an alpha beta. Then you stimulate the reticular activating system. It sends by high frequency stimulation, it sends stimulatory impulses to the thalamus, and what will happen? Then you record the desynchronized or the beta rhythm, or if it's because this is the midbrain reticular activating system which stimulate the thalamus and then the these neurons. Also, if there is any sensory stimulation from sensory receptors to midbrain level, that is, you try to stimulate the brain from the any sensory pathway starting from the sensory receptors to the spinal cord, the tract, and then the thalamus, and then up to the midbrain level. You stimulate at any point or any stimulation, then what will happen? The thalamic, this activating system, reticular activating system will be stimulated, and then what will happen? That the EEG rhythm. Suppose there is any lesion which affects the reticular activating system. This leads to disruption of reticular activity. So whatever EEG record, there is alteration of that EEG. But if only the sensory pathway lesions are there, there will be no change in EEG because the intrinsic activity of the reticular activating system is maintained, because it also receives collaterals from the motor tracts, the corticonuclear tract, the cortico-reticular fibers. So this is the reason that if the sensory pathway is affected, still the EEG changes will not be affected unless the reticular activating system is affected. Whenever there is low frequency stimulation of the thalamic nuclei, what will it cause? It will cause synchronization of alpha rhythm. So because the alpha rhythm, it basically depends upon the thalamic non-specific thalamic nuclei, and when there is frequencies increase, there is waxing and waning, and then what is happening, there is associated with generally with sleep, and these parts of the brain are called as, these are generally associated with sleep, this activity of the thalamus, and they are called as the synchronizing areas, and may be the one which cause the induction of sleep. We'll be discussing the sleep later on. So we have studied till now the EEG. Now what is the clinical application of EEG? Why you need to know all this about EEG? Because it's very important. This EEG is used to diagnose and differentiate different types of epilepsy. Epilepsy is what it is due to increased activity and synchronous discharge of neurons, and in the EEG it records high voltage spikes. We're discussing this EEG, and this helps us to differentiate and diagnose different types of epilepsy. Although we have now better parameters, we have MRI, we have CT scan, they have edge over EEG, but still EEG still is very useful. Secondly, we can localize pathological lesions. We can localize different pathological lesions like space occupying lesions. Now what happens in the brain? In the skull, the brain and the CSF, they occupy a particular area, because if anything increases this volume of the brain, like there is a tumor, there is an abscess or hematoma, so this compresses on the brain, and then you can do the EEG or MRI, CT scan. Will be concentrating on EEG. So what happens in these cases is that you place an electrode over these areas. There is no electrical activity will be recorded. We get a flat line or low amplitude over that particular area. But what happens to the nerve cells which are in proximity to these particular areas? They become irritable. So these tumors and abscesses, the hematoma, they press, or these areas or lesions, they press on the surrounding neurons, and then they become irritable, and then what we record a high voltage activity from these areas. So we can delineate exactly where are these lesions present. So we get a flat line over these, and the surrounding area has become hyper excitable. We can diagnose, at least come to know that there is a pathological lesion. Now, as I told you that in the surrounding area, what happens, there is high voltage and activity, and we get a delta rhythm in these areas, and then in the center there is surrounding these areas, in the center there is a flat line, and we can make out. Then in the cerebral lesion, if there is cerebral lesion, we get irregular or slow EEG waves, or where there is metabolic abnormalities and degenerative diseases also, then we can have the abnormal EEG waves, and it is also used to confirm brain death, and very important is to diagnose different sleep disorders, certain deep sleep disorders. Generally in the sleep labs, what is this? Polysomnography is done or the sleep studies are done. What they do is that we keep the patient overnight. I'll not go in detail into that, and we attach the EEG electrodes, and then we observe the patient from the distance, and we keep the cameras, CCTV cameras, and record his activity, and then the record is next day it is evaluated, and we can diagnose different sleep disorders, sleep apneas, different types of sleep, any disturbances. So all these conditions like or the dysfunctions can be diagnosed with the help of the EEG. Now coming to a very important abnormal condition is epilepsy, mainly known as seizures or fit. So what are these seizures? Seizures are basically temporary disruptions of brain function resulting from abnormal excessive neuronal activity, and epilepsy is a chronic condition of repeated seizures. So seizures are what? They are temporary disruptions of brain function characterized by uncontrolled, unconscious, sudden, abnormal, excessive activity of the part or whole of the CNS neurons. Again, repeat, what are seizures? They are uncontrolled, unconscious, sudden, abnormal, excessive activity of a part or whole of the CNS neurons. And epilepsy is a chronic condition of repeated seizures. So it's a chronic condition of repeated seizures, and 1% of the world's population suffers from epilepsy or seizures. Then a person who is predisposed to these epilepsy can have attacks when the basal level of excitability of the neuron increases beyond the certain threshold levels. So this is very, very important that you take in picture all the things they are based, sometimes they are temporary, and they occur frequently. So the causes are multiple. Causes or etiology of epilepsy is multiple. I am just giving you at your level which is important. Otherwise, this cannot be covered in this lecture. It has to be covered in multiple lectures. But as far as phase 1 MBBS students are concerned, I am talking of this in short. So the causes can be in the central nervous system. So there can be any trauma, head injury, or there is any stroke, like there is ischemia or cerebral ischemia which leads to stroke, or any vascular malformations. There can be any mass or space occupying lesions like tumors, abscesses, etc. They can all cause the epilepsy. Then what other things? Now the infections of the brain or encephalitis or of the membranes, meningitis, then certain congenital malformations, cortical dysplasias, certain degenerative diseases, idiopathic, etc., etc. There is a long list of the causes of the this epilepsy. And so again repeat, any trauma, any head injury, any tumor, any abscess, space occupying lesion, any disruptions, any infections, congenital malformations, any stroke, ischemia, cortical dysplasias, degenerative diseases. Idiopathic means when the cause is not known. So then the systemic conditions, it's not only the conditions present in the central nervous system, but any systemic diseases can also lead to the seizures, like hypo or hyperglycemia, hypo or hypernatremia, hypocalcemia, uremia, hepatic encephalopathy, hypoxia, hyperthermia, drug overdose or withdrawal, etc. So again repeat, any systemic conditions like when there is hypoglycemia, when there is hyperglycemia, or there is hypothermia or hyperthermia. In both cases it can occur. There is hypocalcemia, decreased calcium levels, or uremia, that is renal disease, renal system is affected, and then hepatic encephalopathy, that is due to liver diseases. The infection, it spreads to brain and the brain is involved. Then there is hypoxia, decreased partial pressure of oxygen, or there is hyperthermia. This can also lead to this. Then drug overdose or withdrawal. So hyperglycemia, hypernatremia, hypocalcemia, all these can lead to, or more other factors can lead to epilepsy. Now the types of epilepsies. Epilepsy can be generalized, or it can be focal or local, or complex partial seizures. So generalized can be generalized tonic-clonic seizures, Titmal seizures, here the P is silent, or myoclonic seizure, tonic seizure, clonic seizure, atonic seizure. I'll not be discussing these last four. Myoclonic means certainly the muscles they go under spasm. Totally they some group of the muscle they go into spasm, they go into convulsions, that is the spasm. Then the tonic seizures, then the person that there is increase in the tone, there is increase in the tone of the muscles. Then clonic, there is rather clonic seizures, not the only the clonic, that is this is alternate disruptions, alternate contraction and relaxation occurs, or atonic seizure suddenly there is loss of tone. But I'll be discussing in detail the generalized tonic-clonic seizures, the Titmal seizures, focal or local seizure, and complex or partial seizures. The generalized epilepsy or the what happens, there is diffuse, uncontrolled and excessive discharge which spreads rapidly and simultaneously to both cerebral hemispheres. So it involves both the cerebral hemisphere, it's not localized. So it's a diffuse, uncontrolled and excessive bombardment of discharge which spreads rapidly, very fast and simultaneously to both cerebral hemispheres. Now first is generalized tonic-clonic or grand mal, which was earlier called as grand mal seizures, but now it is called as generalized tonic-clonic seizures. Here what happens, there is simultaneous widespread extreme neuronal discharges in all the brain areas, starting from cerebral cortex to deeper parts of the cerebrum and the brainstem. The person may suddenly lose consciousness. So again repeat, there is simultaneous, side by side, means side by side widespread extreme neuronal discharges in all the brain areas, very rapid. Cerebral cortex, deeper parts of the cerebellum and the brainstem, and the person may lose consciousness. Now when the discharges, they land into the spinal cord. So there is generalized tonic convulsions of the entire body. When these discharges they lead into the spinal cord, there is generalized tonic convulsions of entire body. Tonic mean, what does tonic mean? Tonic means sudden stiffening and clonic means the rhythmical jerking. The tonic phase comes first. All the muscles, suddenly can you imagine, the muscles of the patient suddenly become stiffened. They suddenly become stiffened. They go under contraction. They go under contraction. So the air being forced past the vocal cord, causing the cry or groan. The person loses consciousness, I told you, and may fall to the floor. And the person may even bite his tongue. There may be bite his tongue or his or her tongue inside the cheek, or the saliva may be blood tinged. The saliva may be blood tinged after the tonic phase. So what happens after the tonic phase? There comes the clonic phase. The clonic phase is there, that there is rhythmic jerky activity. In the tonic phase, clonic phase is rhythmic jerky activity. The arms and usually the legs begin to jerk rapidly. Can you imagine a situation? The arms and leg, they suddenly start jerking rapidly and rhythmically, and alternate contraction and relaxation of muscles occurs for about 1 to 2 milliseconds. Bending and relaxation at the elbows, hips and knees. I again repeat, initially what happens, the for about, there is alternate, first there is contraction for about 30 seconds. For 30 seconds there are tonic contraction. The muscles becomes very stiff. The muscles become stiff, and then it may be the person may bite the tongue or the cheek. He has blood tinged saliva. The breathing may be difficult. His face, he may show jerking. Person's face may be look dusky and cyanosed, or he may or she may have trouble in breathing. There will be grunting of the breathing because it's difficult to breathe. The sounds may be produced from the vocal cords, and this is followed by, after these about roughly 30 seconds, these are followed by tonic-clonic seizure. Clonic is the rhythmic. So now what happens? The arms and usually the legs, they begin to jerk rapidly and rhythmically. And what is, there is first contraction, then relaxation. So alternate contraction and relaxation of muscles occur for about 1 to 2 milliseconds, and there is bending and relaxing, especially at the elbows, hips and knees. Then the jerking slows and stops, and the person may lose control of his or bladder, and he may urinate or defecate. Or then the consciousness of a person may return slowly, and these seizures, they may last for about 3 to 4 minutes. Afterwards, the person may be sleepy, confused or irritable, what we called as post-ictal phase or stupor, for about 1 to 2 minutes. He may remain stuporous from about 1 to 2 minutes. So this is important. So we have to manage the patient in this phase, because so whenever you see a patient having the seizure, you have to keep it into consideration that his tongue, he should not be that his breathing should not be affected, his tongue should not fall down, and what happens in certain cases, the blood pressure also increases, the heart rate may increase. So this is also very important. So we have to keep it in consideration, and we have to manage that patient. That moment we have to support the patient, and this is very, very important. You can see this patient. See, I told you what happens initially. There is tonic. See, his all muscles, they are under the his muscles, they stiffen, they go into sudden contraction. See, so you can see here. See, and then what happens after that? There is alternate contraction and relaxation of the muscle. I told you the elbow, the hips, and the knees, and after that, see, their contraction. And he might injure, he's unconscious, he's not aware of himself, so we have to support such a patient. And then after the post-ictal phase, he may suddenly, the muscles, they become relaxed. Now if we go for record the EEG of such a patient, see, this is the EEG. The first, if you see, this is during the tonic phase. See, there is high voltage and high frequency discharge. High voltage and high frequency, both voltage is high as well as frequency is high. This can be recorded from the entire region of cerebral cortex, and similar discharge will be recorded from both sides of the cerebral cortex. See, and during the clonic phase, what happens? It slows. Slow wave is preceded by the, here, slow wave is preceded by the spike. Here is the spike, then the slow wave starts occurring. See, and in the post-ictal phase, the frequency is comparatively decreased, the voltage is also decreased. So this abnormal neural circuitry, what is responsible for the attack, and it strongly involves the basal regions of the brain that drives the cortex. So abnormal neural circuitry drives the basal regions of the brain, and immediately it spreads to both of the cerebral cortex. Simultaneously, discharge occurs on both sides of the brain at the same time because of the abnormal neural circuitry which is present at the basal regions of the brain. See, the slow wave is preceded by the spike. See, this is the EEG what we record here. Now we have to keep it in mind, a person who has epilepsy, there are certain triggering or precipitating factors, what we called as seizure triggers, which may predispose a person to seizure. So what we can do, if we know the seizure triggers, so we can avoid those and lessen the chance of the person to have those attacks. Now there is a hereditary predisposition in 1 in 50 to 100 people of getting the epilepsies. In such persons, there are some triggering factors that can increase the excitability of the abnormal epileptogenic circuitry enough to precipitate the attacks. So these individuals who have hereditary predisposition, the triggers affect them more as compared to the other persons. So the factors can be like, they can occur in the specific time of day or night, or when there is sleep deprivation, when you're overtired, not sleeping well, not getting enough sleep, or there is any febrile or other illnesses. This can also lead to epilepsy, especially in children. It has been seen that fevers can lead to febrile convulsions. Alcohol, then drug overuse, certain strong emotional stimuli or stress can also trigger the epilepsy. Alkalosis caused by hyperventilation. So when you hyperventilate, this alkalosis can also, when you hyperventilate, you remove your excess of carbon dioxide. So this can also trigger. Now, improper intake of food, that is, the person is not taking proper food, they can land up in hypoglycemia. This can also trigger the epilepsy. Then in females, sometimes it is associated with menstrual cycle, and during certain phase of menstrual cycle, she is more predisposed to epilepsy, and hormonal changes can also affect or trigger the epilepsy. And then passage of alternating electric current directly to brain, like you give electroconvulsive therapy in some psychiatric patients, this can also trigger epilepsy. In some individuals, loud noises, flashing lights can also trigger epilepsies. Even certain types of food, like the excess caffeine, it can also trigger this epilepsy. So person comes to know that if I take this food or I drink this particular beverage, I'm going to have the typical epileptic fit. Even traumatic lesions, even if the person is not hereditary exposed, can lead to cause excitability of local brain areas and then can transmit signals into the basal regions of the brain. The traumatic lesions can cause they can form an irritating focus which can keep stimulating the surrounding brain regions. So this is also. Now, why does the attack terminate? The attack may terminate because of major factor that stops the attack after a few minutes is the phenomenon of synaptic fatigue. We have studied synaptic fatigue in detail and not go in detail. So whenever there is synaptic fatigue can lead to termination of attack. But a second factor is that active inhibition by inhibitory neurons that have also been activated, like active inhibition of by the inhibitory neurons. What happens, the inhibitory neurons, because there is excessive discharge in the surrounding areas, so inhibitory neurons are also stimulated. So these neurons now inhibit, cause the active inhibition, and then this can lead to termination of attack. The stupor and total body fatigue that occurs after a grand mal seizure is believed to result from the intense fatigue of the neuronal synapse following their intrinsic activity during the grand mal. So there is, because of this intense activity of the synapse, there is synaptic fatigue and it terminates. Moreover, the inhibitory neurons are also stimulated, which actively inhibits this. Then the second type of generalized seizure is the Epstein seizure or Titmal seizures. It generally begins in childhood or early adolescence and it involves the basic brain activity system. So 15 to 20% cases of childhood epilepsies are Epstein seizures and the duration generally is about 3 to 30 seconds. The duration of Epstein seizure can vary from 3 to 30 seconds. Now, how does this Titmal or Epstein seizure present? What happens that person suddenly becomes unconscious. There may be twitch-like contraction of some head muscles, the facial muscles, especially the eye blinking can be there. What happens is suddenly you see a person and you think that he is not listening to you and he gazes out of the way and there is lack of attention. It appears to him that he is not attentive and he is completely out of focus of each and everything. And he doesn't get involved, and after some time there is return of consciousness and resumption of previous activities. He is the only effect is that the person's awareness of what is going on is lost at the time with immediate recovery, and after the recovery he doesn't even remember what happens. So this is followed by so the total sequence is called the Epstein syndrome or Epstein's epilepsy. The patient may have one or such episodes of these Epstein seizures, and what we see a typical pattern of the pattern of the typical EEG. When we see the EEG, what is there is that usual course of this EEG is that there is a typical spike and dome pattern. See, spike and dome pattern. See, spike and dome pattern. We can typically see the spike and dome pattern in the recording and almost identical to the spikes that you see in the grand mal epilepsy, but the dome pattern is totally, spike is same as in grand mal epilepsy, but the dome pattern is very different, and it can be recorded from most of all of the cerebral cortex. It's showing that the cerebral cortex is completely involved, means that you can record this spike and dome activity from all of the cerebral cortex. And usually the cause of this Titmal epilepsy, this I am talking of typical Epstein seizures, is that it may appear in the appear in the late childhood, and then after some time it disappears entirely by the age of 30 years. On occasion, the Titmal epilepsies, what happens in certain cases, the Titmal epilepsy or the Epstein seizure may land up in the grand mal seizure. So it can precipitate the grand mal seizures. Now, what is the pathophysiology of these generalized seizures? It has been seen that the seizures are caused by paroxysmal, that is sudden discharge from a group of neurons, and which arise or as a result of either excessive excitation or loss of inhibition. That is, either of the two can occur. Either there is excessive excitation of the neurons, or these neurons come out of their inhibition or loss of inhibition. So now the shift in the balance between the inhibitory, that is GABA, which is the inhibitory neuron, and the excitatory glutamate neurotransmitters occurs. So whenever the shift of the balance occurs, when the GABA activities decrease, we see this type of discharge. Now it has been also seen that the estrocytes, they release glutamate, and during these conditions what happens, there is reorganization of estrocytes and sprouting of dendrites occurs, and there is new synapse formation. When there is structural changes occur, when there is epilepsy, structural changes which is associated is seen is that in some cases there is astrocytes start releasing, they release glutamate, and there is reorganization of astrocytes, and moreover there is sprouting of dendrites and new synapse formation does occur. So it has been seen that there is massive activation of many reverberating pathways in the brain. So once a part is stimulated, it keeps on stimulating the other. So there is continuous reverberating pathways which keep on reactivating themselves. Then activation generally occurs in subcortical regions, and then it spreads to both the cerebral hemispheres. It occurs in the subcortical region, and because they are connected, the two cortex are connected by the corpus callosum, so it spreads to both of the cerebral regions. Then it has been seen that structural lesions or injuries etc., they also become an irritating focus and stimulate the adjoining areas. Then in the case of Epstein seizure, it has been seen that there can be oscillation of thalamic neurons, the one which are secreting GABA or inhibitory neurons, and other which are secreting other excitatory thalamocortical and corticothalamic neurons. So there is an oscillation going on between the this thalamic neurons, one secreting GABA and the other excitatory thalamocortical and corticothalamic neurons. Now it has been seen that 1/3 of the seizures, they are due to any genetic abnormality, mainly mainly the ion channels are involved. So 1/3 of the seizures are because of the genetic abnormalities involving the ion channels. It has been seen that genetic mutation is associated with generally with idiopathic epilepsy. For example, the childhood Epstein epilepsy, it has been seen that there are mutations of the GABA receptor gene, and so GABA receptor becomes defective, and there is another inherited form of febrile convulsions where there is mutation of sodium channels. Now febrile convulsions are generally seen in some children, and with age they recover, but in inherited form of febrile convulsions they may not recover completely, and half of the seizures there is no structural abnormality, no genetic abnormality. So the cause is not exactly evident that why does they. Now other type of seizure is focal or local seizures or partial seizure, what we call. Here it can involve almost any part of the brain, either localized region of the cerebral cortex or deeper structures of cerebrum and brainstem can be involved. Now the etiology can be, there can be any localized organic lesion or functional abnormality. So any local lesion or any functional abnormality can lead to local seizure. So where we can find such type of abnormality, this can be there is any old scar tissue, neuronal tissue, that what this will do, this will pull on the normal neuronal tissue, or there is a tumor that compresses on the area of the brain, so it can lead to irritable focus and stimulate the other areas, or a damaged brain tissue areas can also be a irritating focus. Sometimes the congenitally deranged local circuitry can lead to these excessive stimulations, or there is vascular malformations, lesions which can compress can also lead to vascular malformations, the affected blood supply, it can also lead to the focal seizure. Now what happens that these lesions, what they do is they can promote extremely rapid discharges on the local neurons, and when the discharge rates rise beyond 1000 per second, then what they can do, the synchronous waves, they start spreading in the adjacent cortical areas, and because of the localized reverberating circuits, they may gradually recruit larger and larger areas, and then this epileptic discharge zone goes on increasing. The process when spreads to adjacent areas, then first the rate is slow and then it becomes very rapid. So sorry, focal seizures, they can spread from locally from a focus or more remotely to a contralateral cortex, and then what they will do to subcortical area of the brain through projections of the thalamus, because via the thalamus there is widespread connection of the both hemispheres. So when such a wave it starts spreading sorry excuse me, progressive spread of wave of excitation occurs over the motor cortex, then the progressive march of muscle contraction occurs to the opposite side of the body, beginning from the mouth region and marching progressively downwards to the leg or other way around. What happens, this is called as Jacksonian march or Jacksonian epilepsy, like you march past, so it keeps on spreading. So because the two cerebral cortex, they are connected with the help of the thalamic nuclei or thalamic projections. So a single focus can spread to a larger areas, or what happens, it remain confined to a particular area like the brain, or or spread or it may spread and it becomes lead to generalized epilepsy. And it has been seen that these may begin with an aura, or impaired consciousness and strange repetitive movements may occur. So it's not like grand mal seizures, but in these partial seizures, it may there may be aura, like a person feels something, or if it may be followed by impaired consciousness and strange repetitive movements. And after recovery, what happens? The person may have no memory of the attack and except for the aura. And if you see, you record the EEG will record irregular high frequency and low voltage waves. High frequency and low voltage. Now the complex partial seizures, which were earlier called as grouped into the earlier seizures like psychomotor seizure, temporal lobe epilepsy or limbic seizures. Now they are better called as complex partial seizures because of the their complex behaviors. Now clinically they can present as short periods of amnesia, total loss, especially for recent events. Though there may be attack of sudden abnormal range can be there, or sudden anxiety, discomfort or fear can be there, or there can be deja vu phenomena can be occur. So it can occur in any form. So these complex regions can occur from other regions, like not only from the temporal lobe but from the limbic lobe, and so that is why they are included in the complex partial seizures. Now he may be like present as just he keeps on mumbling something, or you are not able to comprehend him. There is incoherent speech, or some typical phrase he may keep on repeating, or he may show a motor attack. He tries to attack you, or he keep on rubbing his face with the hand and so forth. So sometimes the person can remember his activities during the attack, but at other times what happens is that he's not conscious of everything that he had been doing but unable to control it. So nothing is in under control. You might think that he is trying to act too smart, but it's not like this. So the attacks of this type can involve like areas of the limbic portion, especially the hippocampus, amygdala, septum and the temporal lobe, all the part of the this limbic system. And you see the EEG will, you'll get the low frequency EEG waves about 2 to 4 second with intermingled with the higher frequency in between, that is 14 per second waves. 14 waves per second can be recorded. So basically record 2 to small low frequency waves of about 2 to 4 seconds. In between you may record the high voltage waves. In between you may record the waves with higher frequency like 14, which may be superimposed over these. Such type of record will be seen in the case of complex partial seizures. So how are you going to treat the patient? You should try to reduce the excitability. You try to enhance the inhibitory neuronal transmission. So what you have to keep it in consideration? You have to keep it in consideration. The treatment depends upon the age of the patient, the overall health scenario of the patient, the medical history, the type of the seizures, the frequency of the seizures. And first of all, what you do, you try to treat the underlying cause if possible. If there is a tumor or space occupying lesion or the brain abscess, you try to treat the cause if it is possible. Then further what you do is that then certain medications, especially the symptomatic, you can give anticonvulsants. We try to prevent the seizures. So you can give multiple drugs. I'll just name a few Like gabapentin, what does it do? It acts by decreasing the calcium influx into the cells and reduces the glutamate release. So gabapentin inhibits the calcium inflow into the cells, and this will lead to decrease in the glutamate release. Secondly, topiramate blocks the voltage gated sodium channels associated with glutamate receptors, resulting in potentiation of inhibitory effect of GABA. I told you can increase the inhibitory effect of the neurotransmitter. So topiramate, it will inhibit the voltage gated sodium channels associated with glutamate release, and this will result in potentiation of the inhibitory effect of GABA. Then ethosuximide reduces the low threshold, it reduces the low threshold calcium current in the thalamic neurons. Therefore, this can be used in the treatment of Epstein seizure. So, what does it do? It reduces the low threshold calcium current in thalamic neurons, and then it is generally used in the Epstein seizures. Then phenytoin and valproate, they act on the voltage gated sodium channels to reduce the glutamate release and thus block the firing of the neurons. Then other drugs like carbamazepine, phenobarbital, benzodiazepines, they also have some time of similar effects. Then sometimes we can go for surgery. The seizures associated with temporal lobe are generally treated with the surgical treatment. Then even vagal nerve stimulation sometimes can be effective in the partial seizures. Hope I have covered a lot of things. If you have any query, I have not gone in very much detail of the epilepsy, because as far as the phase 1 students are concerned, this much is sufficient. Thank you, goodbye, and all the best.